Welcome to WIS Presents How I Got into Sports Tech. Both Sydney and I are here today alongside with Cheri and Nola. For those of you who are unfamiliar with WIS, we're a nonprofit organization that drives growth opportunities for women at all stages of their career throughout the sports tech and innovation landscape. Today's webinar, WIS Presents How I Got into Sports Tech, was created to provide a platform for discovery and discussion. We're excited to have two impressive educators joining us whose work in higher education helps change the ratio, as we like to say it at WIST, and increase the number of women in the sports tech field. So I'll pass it on to Sydney to go through the intros.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lydia. And I'm very excited to have Nola and Cheri here with us today. So Dr. Nola Agha is an associate professor in the sport management program at the University of San Francisco, where she teaches graduate level courses in quantitative analysis and strategic management. She began her career at CNET during the dot-com boom in the late 1990s. She's also worked in the international business operations and has consulted to the sport industry for clients in the MLB, NBA, and minor sports leagues. Her research focuses on issues of distributive justice involving stadium subsidies and wage inequities for both women and minor league athletes. And we're lucky also to have Sydney here, who was Nola's student this semester and a WIS fellow. So we'll hear from her a little bit later, but just everything tying back into WIS. And then we have Dr. Cheri Bradish. She's the Loretta Rogers Research Chair in Sport Marketing with the Ted Rogers School of Management at Ryerson University. She comes to Ryerson after 16 years at Brock University, where she was the first faculty hire and founder of their successful Bachelor of Sport Management degree. At Brock, she served in a number of leadership roles during her tenure, including in the chair capacity. A sport marketing expert, her area of scholarship interest is with regards to sport business strategy and trends, including innovation and entrepreneurship, sport and social impact, and women in sport leadership. Cheri also has significant experience in the sport industry, including work with the Florida Sports Foundation, Nike Canada, Florida State University Department of Athletics with the NCAA, the Vancouver Grizzlies with the NBA, and the Vancouver Organizing Committee for the 2010 Olympic and Paralympic Games. So thank you both for joining us today. And without further ado, I'll leave it to Lydia to start with the questions.
Great. Thanks, Sydney.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're excited for today's discussion. So we'll dive right into the questions. I think today this is going to be really helpful because we have a lot of women sports tech community members who are just curious how to learn more about the space or get into it. So we do have a lot of students on today. But my first question would be, how do you define sports tech? What does sports tech mean to you in your role at your university?
Nola, do you want to go first? Or?
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump into that. I guess the easy answer is I define it very broadly. And I guess starting with some examples, if we even just take the phrase sport tech, if we break it apart, if we think about just sport, you can imagine a company like Nike. You could work there and you could develop any of their wearable technologies. You could market their wearable technologies. Sydney, for example, you could work for the NBA and you can analyze data, so you can be a data analyst. And if you look at the second half of that phrase, if you focus on tech, I mean, there's tons of tech companies that sell to or interact with sport. So that could be like Zebra Technologies and all of their tracking that they've applied to the sports setting in the NFL. It could be Ticketmaster. They're essentially a software company. And of course, they interface with almost all the major sports. VR companies that do training for athletes. It could even be like Google and Amazon and Twitter and Facebook. I mean, these are all tech companies that now interface with sport. And then I think you can put them in combination. Sport tech can mean, you think about firms that are endemic to the sport industry. So it could be, what's this amazing company I just heard about, Form. They sell swimming goggles with like computerized little screens inside of them that tell you your heart rate and your laps, and they measure your distance, and even apps that track like your team, Team Snap and Sports Engine, and these companies that sell essentially software so that you go to organize rec leagues. So it's I think it's just extremely broad, and it can mean a lot of different things, which makes it, to be quite honest, more fun.
Definitely. I feel like I've learned so much at different companies, and Catapult, where I work now, I really had no idea. And I thought to stay connected to sport, I had to be with an apparel company like Nike or Adidas. Yeah, definitely a lot on the performance side of things as well. Excellent. And then could you share a few examples of jobs in sports tech your students have gone to?
Yeah, Cheri, do you want to take that, or did you want me to continue?
Nola can continue, that's fine.
All right. Yeah. So let's see. Thinking about sport tech roles, GumGum is a company that uses AI to measure sponsorship valuation. We have a student there who's worked as an account manager. And I will say our program is not an MS. We don't teach, programming, for example. So students are usually taking non-technical roles within sport tech companies. That makes sense. We've had people work on the biz dev and sales side. Hyperice, it's a company that develops athlete recovery products.
They're sponsoring the NBA finals right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so recently now that, they've become much more popular. They've been around for, 5 years or something like that. But yes, tech companies grow. We start to hear about them, right? They start to engage with brands. Tencent, one of the largest conglomerations in China. They're definitely involved in esport. They're involved in all sorts of technology. We have a student there that works in sport marketing strategy. Twitter, sports partnerships. So a lot of different tech companies, but again, mostly non-technical roles are what our students are taking.
Great. Thanks, Nola. Sorry, I didn't mean to skip you, Cheri. We'll go to you next. And
No,
if you could just, if you could define sports tech and then kind of
Sure.
go into the roles your students are in.
And I think maybe what's helpful is to give them the context. And I always apologize when people have to read those long bios. So I'll give the context of perhaps the relevance of the work we're doing to sport tech as a way to define it at Ryerson. So we established in 2014, 15, at the time, a sport tech incubator at our school. And so we immerse ourselves in it, and I have led the majority of those initiatives. They've been partnered in partnership with two major partners. One is Rogers Communication, which is a large telco here in Canada that owns some sport properties. And then most recently in 2018, we partnered with Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. So we have a fully functioning incubator accelerator at our school. And then in partnership with that and the work I do with the sport business landscape, we established first the Sport Innovation Lab, and now what we call the Future Sport Lab, which is to support and cultivate sport tech companies and startups. And so we are hands-on. Some of the people we work with in our team are staff, our technical support, and then we have a cadre of advisors. But how we integrate that to education is then, in particular, through our MBA program. We integrate the sport business stream students in one or two, three different ways. They work with insights directly with our team or with the startups directly. They intern with the startups and help with business development. And then at large, they help with our programming. So I think, like Nola indicated, we have similar approaches and understandings of why sport tech is so important to sport business students. But our experiences in that space are really driven first and foremost through the lab. And then we have research and insights and then integrate it to our education. So I would say that's how we integrate sport tech and innovation into the work that we're doing in our university institution, which is in Toronto.
Awesome. And just to sort of go on a tangent for a second, could you kind of walk us through what a day in the lab looks like? It sounds like a really exciting place, and I'm sure it's an exciting place for students to work. And maybe a pre-COVID day might be more exciting,
Sure.
but
yeah.
Of
course. And I mean, it varies by company, it varies by day, as you can imagine, and where we are in the cycle of mentoring these startups. They go through the program. It's typically a year program, some residency, some not. So I'll do a day in the life of a programming day. So we have, in partnership with our lead partners, probably 75 mentors and advisors, and they range from business development, corporate partners, leading brands, media, and tech, and the investment community. Some government partners too. And so what we do is we build curriculum and programming for them. so that we can help them kind of in an academic model, industry model, transition through some programming, give them on-hands coaching and training and access to building their business and helping them accelerate their business. We're very much generally early stage, so the companies don't have a lot of funding yet, but we know that is paramount and usually the first and always guiding light that they want access to funding and support. And so we wrap that business mindset around a support team from the MBA students and the undergraduate students as well. And so that's typically what a day looks like, as we put them in the training, and we try to give them as much access as possible, knowing that the students are working with them behind the scenes. And then I would say we're fundamentally aware of how can we help them through their business development cycle, if that helps.
Definitely, and that sounds super exciting. So just now, I guess going back to sort of what students can do maybe to prepare themselves and also to sort of attain those roles in the sports tech space. What experience should students have or look to have to make them qualified for a sports tech role? And especially for any students joining us, what can they sort of do today or tomorrow or next week to try and help sort of, expedite that process or prepare themselves?
There we go. Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think about it a couple different ways. I mean, the first is to imagine what your role is. What is your domain specific knowledge that you need? Are you somebody who's passionate about marketing? Are you interested in sales? Do you want to be involved in their communications? So first and foremost, you have to have the skills for whatever role you want to be engaged in a company. And so I think that's really critical. You have to think about how companies hire. They hire in silos. And so what skills do you have within that silo, and what can you really offer the company? And so that can be coursework, that could be internships. There's so many like free educational certifications and programs now online with COVID. And so you can get LinkedIn Learning certificates, and you can get certificates from a ton of different places. So to really build that. And I think the second is to understand the broader context of the firm and the industry. So again, if you're involved in a tech company that's all about wearable technology or tracking data, then you have to understand either that sport, or you have to understand that the competitive environment. Who are your competitors? Because that's a space that's expanding really quickly. So even if you're on the communication side, you have to know not only your firm and what they do, but who are their rivals? What else is going in the industry? What are the industry trends that are affecting what's going on? And so that's always going to make you a better worker when you understand that bigger picture. And that can certainly come from coursework. It can also just come from reading and reading broadly, or even reading like industry publications that are focused on that area that you're interested in. And I mean, I will say one of the other things that we do is we just try and give students access to that through the classroom. So we'll bring in CEOs and entrepreneurs. ChatSport is a local company, Fan Compass is a local company, Moxie Travel. So bring in those type of entrepreneurs and those types of leaders, and just give students access to that kind of like cutting edge information too. So that's also a great way, is just to talk to people in the industry and to really get a pulse of what's going on.
I would just piggyback on that, if that's okay. So Nola always hits on the right good parts. I think for me, just to stress up front in terms of the participants and attendees and maybe on the phone, a couple of things I would share is that, and we talked about this in the pre-webinar call, why I think this sport tech innovation entrepreneurship space is so important is, and Nola and I talked about this, it presents you as a multidisciplinary employee in the sport business field as you're headed out the door and looking for jobs. And so I stress that in terms of when talking to my students, to understand they may not be a tech person, they may not be an entrepreneur, but to understand it is so fundamentally important to the type of business that we're looking at today, in particular, reevaluating everything with the pandemic and disruption of COVID-19. And so just to piggyback onto what Nola suggested, we try to, in our programming through the lab, help them really understand the journey of the entrepreneur and what a startup entrepreneur experiences personally and professionally. Because I think whether you're up at midnight ordering a pizza or figuring out how do you define your elevator pitch, all those pieces are life pieces. And so, and I know that breaks it down really fundamentally from the business, but I think spend some time with some entrepreneurs and some startups. They're always looking for people with a variety of skills and assets, and it helps you understand a diverse, multidisciplinary team. And then I think also to really understand how innovation and Sydney, with the NBA, and Lydia, with your company, really understand how innovation is working with and changing with the industry. I would get on my soapbox a little bit, and it's happening so fast. I think sport business programs are trying to catch up with en masse in North America, the curriculum changes in sport business education. So really, as Nola said, follow those industry publications, subscribe to Sport Techie. I find front office sports, for a student's perspective, really can break down and distill you understanding who these technologies are, what they're doing, why they're so fundamentally important. And then it makes you comfortable with the theory and practice of sport business and innovation. And if you think about it as how are you disrupting the industry, and then what is the startup journey, or what is the journey of these companies that are innovative and tech focused, I think it will really help distinguish you from so many sport business grads that are there today.
Yeah, that's super helpful, because I feel like the best thing students can do to position themselves is just really learn about the space or set up exploratory calls. And that's kind of what I had to do, because I was a little bit behind when I was getting into sports tech. And it just really helped, all the resources we have on LinkedIn, and we're just really fortunate to have that.
Right. And I think through your network in particular, it's fundamentally important. Then we know that there's so many resources available in COVID that you can participate in online. So it's a great time to educate or re-educate yourself in this space.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
That's why we love these webinars.
Yeah, definitely. And if you guys had to pick sort of one or two courses that you think would be great, and I think it also, as we've said, it kind of depends on what you're interested in. You're not going to maybe have someone take a detailed sports marketing course if they're not building, if that's not their domain, perhaps like expertise. Maybe having an intro level is good, but what courses would you sort of recommend for students to get going in the space?
I mean, I certainly think what Cheri is talking about, entrepreneurship. I mean, if you feel like you're going to be at a startup, if you love that idea of getting on the ground level with a sport tech company, absolutely. I think my biggest recommendation though would be to again, think small and think big. So think about your domain, get your expertise in whatever you want to do, whether it's marketing or biz dev or programming or data analytics. And then I would recommend that big picture view. And so that could be through an entrepreneurship course, but it could also be through like a strategic management course where you're really thinking at like an industry level. You're thinking more like a manager, like a CEO, and that's going to force you to improve your skills, but also be more valuable to your company in the sense that you see the big picture, but you can also do really great things when it comes time to do your job. So I think that the small and the big are both really important.
Yeah, and I would just add that the strategy, entrepreneurship, maybe think about if you don't have someone in your institution that perhaps has a passion or the background or interest in sport innovation entrepreneurship. We know you can always tailor your projects or approach them and say, we'd like to work on X and Y. And I know Nola and I are probably very happy to take questions offline if you need a prompt or a great case study, and there is becoming more and more. And then I think, every organization will talk about, have you taken an analytics course and have a basic understanding of the analytics? And so that so informs decision-making. So from a undergrad, graduate level, we always encourage our students to have one or two of those. And then the last one I'll just add that's been really helpful in terms of how we've shifted our projects in the MBA not entirely, but to some degree in terms of problem solving, is just a really good understanding of design thinking, because that has helped us improve, quite frankly, the results and deliverables to our industry partners that we work with on our school projects. And I will say it helps you embrace the spirit of entrepreneurship and innovation in terms of thinking about empathy and the customer experience. And so if you get comfortable with that, you'll be able to jump into a nimble team, perhaps in a real world experience, probably a little bit faster. So there are those. Thank you.
I can't agree more with the design thinking. I mean, I took a course when I was abroad, and it only counted for a pass fail, but it was on human interaction design, and it was like one of the most interesting computer science electives I've ever taken. And it didn't involve a ton of coding, but I was in London, and one of the things that we did was look at the cycling, you know, like the city bikes. I think it was Santander cycles, and just how people interact with renting a bike and seeing that. So something like just thinking, and you know, you would just do informational interviews, and I would go and just like watch people have trouble putting it back, and just seeing the whole experience there. Like, you realize how important it is to sort of not build something in a vacuum. As you know, we spoke about that on our last webinar with doing a ton of interviews, but the design thinking approach, I can't read a book about it to all our participants. I can't recommend that enough. So that's great advice.
Perfect. Excellent. And then our last question before the speed round is, what is higher education doing to help women prepare for roles in sports tech specifically? I feel like a lot of times we might feel that imposter syndrome and might not feel confident to apply for a role. Yeah, just curious about that.
That's a really good one. So one of the things that I, as an educator, have noticed in the classroom is that women behave different than men. And it's just a fact. You know, there are differences, and they're sometimes small and they're sometimes large. But what I realized at one point is that they were maybe behaviors that weren't not necessarily detrimental, but affected perceptions, affected progress, affected what was going on. And so one of the things that I've started to do is just a lot of more one-on-one mentoring. I think almost all of it comes down to confidence. And I mean, if you're talking about imposter syndrome, a lot of it is that, just not believing that you really belong in a space. And so a lot of that, I think, can just come from positive reinforcement. So thinking about how I can work with groups of women or individuals to collectively discuss, to think about what's going on. There's an amazing book called The Confidence Code that I've recommended to a lot of students, and it's just been super eye-opening for them. It's that kind of that thing that they needed to take a step back and look at themselves and their actions, and then realize that they had it in them, you know, to begin with, and that it was really all there, and that they just needed to take that step forward. I mean, I was a petrified introvert for most of my life, and it took, once I kind of overcame that, I was like, oh, you know, again, it was all there on the inside. And so I think that I can relate a lot of times to students that are in that position, and just try and encourage them. I think that's a really important part of it. So it's not the skills, it's not the training, you know, like again, as humans, we all have the capacity to learn and be fantastic at whatever we do. And so just providing that platform sometimes, and again, access and information. Like I said, you know, I'm always bringing in guest speakers to the classroom and CEOs and important people, and wanting students to connect with those, you know, of course, of any gender, but it's also wonderful to have those role models where you can look up to somebody that you didn't know had that job, or somebody that now looks like you. So all those small things are really important also.
What was the name of the book? Confidence Code?
Yeah, The Confidence Code.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. To add that to my list. Okay. Great.
I can add just a couple other pieces in terms of, Lydia, if that's all right, the female, supporting the females in the academy, if you want.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So as usual, Nola and I have many of the same perspectives. I think without a doubt, finding a support network. My girlfriends call it build your own cabinet, your kitchen cabinet, which is your professional assistance and I'm very proud Canadian. I think Netta knows many of the same people that I go to on many occasions just to run wild ideas by and just have that support to, you know, push you through that door. So it's fundamentally important. It's tough right now with COVID, I'll be honest, because we know women and girls, and if you have kids at home, we're all balancing a lot. So more than anything, I think build that network, and you'd be surprised how it's a reciprocal network. But that being said, just to add to it, the other thing, in addition to build a cabinet, the one-on-one mentorship is fantastic, both in the industry and just building your career, regardless of what stage you're at. I also find two things have been helpful for me in this space to tell the story of why female entrepreneurship and innovation is important. One is look at some of the writings and research done, and I have an MBA who's always pushing me to do this work on female sports science and why we need more female sports scientists, because the data is there why from a grassroots level to professional sport, technology is not migrating in the same level and rate, and it's tied to entrepreneurship teams, it's tied to examinations. So another area I'd encourage you to spend a little bit of time, and there's a couple great editorials in the last year around why we need more female sports scientists. I can give you the link so you can post them if you want.
Oh, that'd be awesome. Yeah, I'm really interested in that area.
Yeah, Outside Magazine started a conversation that's really been interesting. And the other thing I would suggest to encourage everyone to think about, and I learned this from a couple of large venture capitalists in the city, females sometimes don't love the pitching, and I don't want to characterize that in anything, but females are phenomenal at storytelling, and we have phenomenal rich stories. And so be comfortable with understanding how you can embrace storytelling as a communication method for yourself personally, and embrace it if you're building a business or working with a team, how strong storytelling can be in the entrepreneurship journey. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Awesome.
For those. So now we can start the speed round if you guys are ready. So thank you so much for the confidence code, Nola. But other than that, do either of you have any favorite books that you've read this year that you would recommend to everyone?
Oh, recommend. That's different. I have a lot of favorite books, but they're so random. Like I started reading Machiavelli. I mean, we're entering an authoritarian world, and I thought, well, let's go back to the expert and see how this all started. Stamped was really important. That was part of our family reading list for this summer, so we could have amazing conversations with our kids about race and anti-racism. And there's actually one that I've pulled out recently because I've kind of cited it a lot lately, but it's by Rod Fort and Jason Winfrey, who are two amazing sports economists, and it's 15 sports myths. And sports myths, that sounds weird when you say it out loud, sports myths, and why they're wrong. So anyway, I was recently citing that to a lot of people, and I was like, I should just pull that back out again. So none of them on tech or entrepreneurship, but kind of some interesting reading choices for this year.
Awesome.
I would add, I assign to my MBAs at the beginning of every term with me for the first time they've had me, The Tipping Point. I know it's a classic, Malcolm Gladwell, but I want them to start to think about thinking big and outside the box. And so it's a good, making them comfortable with being uncomfortable is my goal. And so I start with that one. And then I'll have to be honest, I also, in the context of this and everything we're talking about, I'm very sensitive to the BIPOC conversations in our space. And also, we haven't talked about it here, but us thinking and being purposeful about diversity in our field and representative and understanding of that. And I think women have a really important role to play in that. So again, I can provide a couple of really good readings that are a little bit back, even back to when I did my PhD, but have been helpful in framing sociologically as thinking social managerial about this issue in 2020.
Perfect. Thank you. The next one is favorite podcasts. There's so many going on, especially during COVID. Do you have any recommendations for us?
You know what? I am not a podcast kind of person. I listen to my NPR in the morning, and then I love reading. I mean, I just can't get enough of books. So I'll give you just one more then. Disrupt innovations. If you think about anything that Clayton Christensen has written, that's actually really, I've been talking a lot with the strategy students about that, just because right now we've been forced to innovate in ways we never have before. And I'm sure that he's got some good podcasts, but those are really good ones on disruptive innovation.
Nice.
Yeah, and I would just say, in tacking on to that, I like how I built this and the podcast that kind of walk through the entrepreneurship journey, and it goes back to helping me understand storytelling. I have two boys, 8 and 12, so I'm just going to tell you the concept of finishing and starting a book, just put it out there. This isn't the summer for me to start and finish a book or a podcast, but I do my best to get through them.
Awesome. And then the last one is, what are some sports tech trends or innovations that you're most excited about?
That's a great question. Like I just touched on, there's so much innovation going on right now. I mean, every company is being forced to change and do things differently in ways that at a speed at which they've never had to before. I'm still excited to see what's going to happen with VR and sport. A few years ago, we worked with a company called YBVR. They were trying to convince professional teams that it would be great to sell basically a subscription that people could sit at home and watch the game. And the teams were like, but wait a minute, we want them in the stands. And there was this, this conflict, right? Like, do you really want them to watch it from everywhere? Or do you really just want everybody in the building? Because you need that crowd noise. And here we're in a world where now kind of maybe we want people to be at home. So I'm just fascinated to see where VR is going to take us. And to be honest, all the at-home sort of technologies that we have for exercise, I actually think that at a global scale, these are really critical and important. There's been a lot of health and obesity epidemics in first world countries, and like that's a big issue. And if we have access to more of those at home, maybe we'll start to see some shifts and change there. At the same time, I'm also very cognizant of the fact I was on a call with the Playworks and Special Olympics the other day, and they're doing all their programming online, but honestly, their biggest challenge is access to technology and Wi-Fi. And so at some level, you bring it back to your root, and it's like we have all these great technologies, but if we don't have the infrastructure for everyone to access these, so I'm even excited to see what companies are doing. The Googles of the world, the Ryersons, these companies that have stepped up and offered more technologies to people that don't have access to them. In some ways, I think if we can increase that for everybody in the country, that might be the most amazing thing that comes out of this.
Again, AR, VR, I'm interested in it as much as I know I need to educate myself more about it and understand the role it can play. I think 5G and the new technologies in that space, super interesting and transformative and will be interesting. I think as a pure sport business prof, the technologies that are driving or changing fan engagement, because traditionally in North America, fans are at the core of the fan spectator experience. So I'm fascinated to see what will be the long tail of that and how fans will continue to be engaged in the next year anyways, probably with COVID-19. And then just to Nola's point earlier, I think the social impact related to the technologies, because we know on the margins, and it's talked about here, how fundamentally this is also a socioeconomic times where many communities and individuals and groups have been forced out of sport because of COVID-19 and funding and the economy. And so we go back and forth. Some groups don't even consider sport and social impact technologies as a different vertical, so to speak. But I just continue to raise that because I think it can play an important part in bringing society back as participants in sport and activity.
Definitely. And thank you both for your insight in the speed round. And before now we actually have a question for Sydney Dodson. A little confusing with the same name, but at least we can differentiate based on our first initial. So Sydney was, as I said, was one of Nola's students at USF and was a WISP fellow this past summer. And she worked as a data analyst at Zoom. And I know that we have Amir, one of the co-founders at Zoom, who's joining us today as well. So welcome and thank you for hosting, Sydney. And so I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the WIS Fellowship, how you applied, and what you learned in your program at USF, and sort of just to tell us about how the hands-on experience complemented your coursework. Yeah.
So I first heard about WIST from USF. I think actually Nola might have mentioned it whenever I took her class last year. And I didn't apply at first in 2019 for the fellowship, as it was a bit more structured with submitting your own proposal. And I had just started the program and I was still in a gray area of not knowing what exactly I wanted to go into in the industry or even in the sports tech industry. This past year, just before the pandemic, Mary Lou spoke to our program, and she mentioned that it's a little bit different this year. You can sign up, you can apply and pick between your top 3 choices of structured internships that WIST has available. And I was like, wow, that's pretty interesting. The year prior, I had one brief exposure to data analytics, and prior to or during this time, so from January 2020, I had started getting some information and exposure in social media. And I had already worked within like the broadcast realm, so I was making my way through like the media section. And I applied, and I am so happy that I've had the opportunity to be a data analyst at Zoomf. WIST gave me the opportunity to dive deep into social media. Through this position, I pulled social media metrics for sports teams and leagues, and later turned them into a story through a couple blogs that I contributed to. I learned time management, that's for sure, as the latter of my fellowship was while I was on a 6-week break from school, which was very helpful. I wish I was able to have Nola's class during this fellowship, as her quantitative analysis class would go hand in hand with the final project I did centered around WNBA player salaries in the US and abroad. And in one of my blogs, I actually wrote a little bit about that, so I was able to incorporate them both. And also to when I realized that it reminded me how small the industry is, because my very first class, we had to write a career prospectus paper talking about what we would be interested in and what we plan to work with in the industry. And one of my potential interviewees, I reached out to who's on the marketing team for the Washington Mystics. He later referred me to someone else who I got an interview with, but I kept in touch with him over time. And turns out he knows Amir Hunter Lockman. And it's just really crazy because I recently messaged him about the blog that I wrote and feedback, but it was exciting to know that through everything from something that I started at the beginning of the program until now, it continues to go full circle. So yeah, I'm very interested or very excited and eager to apply what I've learned at Zoomf to my last elective, which will start in October, because I'm done in December with the program, as I'm taking social media and sport with Danny Pedroza. Yeah, so I'm really excited.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And it was great to hear about the sort of kind of full circle journey and how you were able to integrate the coursework also with the hands-on experience and how it all sort of relates. So I'm gonna hand it off to Lydia now to do one of the audience submitted questions.
Yep, that sounds good. But yeah, and then thanks, Sydney. It's been incredible to see just how much you've learned in the fellowship, and your network is huge, I feel like, in the sports tech space. So definitely keep up the great work. So our question from Amir is, what inspires you with your role with students and what keeps you up at night?
You want to go first, Nola?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, what inspires me is, honestly, I just love working with the students. It's amazing to see their progress. So, you know, like Sydney touched on, she did this project in the quantitative analysis course. She was passionate about the WNBA. She went and collected all this data. She analyzed all this data. And so it's inspiring to see that full circle. I mean, exactly what she just described. And what's amazing is we get to see that with all of our students. And so it's amazing. And it's that connection. And we always tell them it all ties together, which is exactly what she just talked about, right? I mean, it really does all tie together at the end of the day. And when you see somebody make that full journey and it has connected, that's it. That's exactly what we're shooting for. But you know, what keeps me up at night? That's a tougher one. It's certainly in education. What keeps us up is how we can continually improve and focus on the student experience. I mean, we'll just say it at every meeting we ever have. It's like, how is this what's best for the student? Is this what's best for the student? And as our external world changes, we're constantly reevaluating, you know, what is best for the student. And like I said, sometimes it's the most fundamental things that we can't control. It's access to stable Wi-Fi, you know, so that you can get to class on time. And so some of those problems we have a hard time solving on our own, and they're not actually things that we have direct control over. And so it makes us go further outside of our small little world and what our job responsibilities are, but to make sure that that full experience is optimal in every way that we can possibly make it optimal for students.
I would add, again, more of the same. I think for me, what inspires me is that you so fundamentally, and again, I'm in Toronto, so it's a very diverse, if not one of the most diverse cities in the world, not unlike San Francisco. Very different from Tallahassee, Florida, where I went to grad school. And I say that because, you know, dealing with Generation Y and Z during COVID, and as we think about what the next iteration of the sport industry looks like, there's no better frontline conversation than what we have with the students around the horn. What's going on? How do you react to it? You know, hockey is a traditional sport in Canada. Our class, you know, Netta knows this. They're Raptors fans in Toronto. And there's good reason for that of late. So the passion and that's the inspiration. And for me, what keeps me up at night, I mentioned it earlier. I've been part of the development of 2 programs and in sport business education for 20 plus years. And I'm curious that in how our industry as sport business educators, because it's so significantly expanded, will authentically keep pace with where the industry is going. And I know the industry, and you should know this, is looking at business students and engineers and analytics and data analysts. And so how does sport management keep relevant? Keeps me up personally and professionally, probably more than anything else. And it's just a FYI to think about really diversifying yourself so you can represent, I think, where the industry is going, not perhaps where it's always been, to take a line from Wayne Gretzky and edit it a little bit, because I think we know that the industry trends are changing and they're looking for a nimble, informed sport business professional. So how do we help in that journey?
Definitely. And I feel like the 45 minutes has really flown by. We had a ton of other questions, but I think, you know, unfortunately, we probably have to wrap up. I can just have one quick more audience submitted question. Other than a general understanding of analytics, what are some specific technical skills students and young professionals looking to get into sports partnerships should learn? And I would say just, you know, I'm a Python person, so sort of the basic coding knowledge. You can do free coding one. You can get a 1-week subscription and cancel it after, to sort of a Udacity if you want, but there's a lot of great courses you could get, and there's a ton of free data sets and you can sort of just work on your skills on your own. You don't need a job or you know, necessarily a project to just continue to
Right.
develop your skills. I'm not sure if any of you have anything to add there that I didn't get.
No, I mean, I even know students to start very fundamentally will download some of the research papers from the MIT Sloan Sport Analytics Conference just to understand the terms and breadth and depth of some of that knowledge. So that's another resource where you can get some of those pieces.
Great advice. I read a lot of those papers for fun. Actually, our summer intern, just because I don't have a library subscription anymore, you know, like Duke libraries used to could download papers, and there was a paper I wanted to read on defense, and I asked her to download it for me from the library and send it so that I could read it. And I felt like it was a real nerd ask, but you know, just reading those papers and reading research is super valuable. And I think that we should underscore, you know, MIT Sloan started out of a classroom. And so the value of higher education and sports tech really can't be, we can't highlight it enough, because that's almost a ton of people in the sports tech space have been inspired, have thought of companies after that conference, and that came out of a higher education and sports partnership, and that's a super important partnership. So I hope we can continue to have those partnerships and learn. Thank you both for your insight today, and we will be sending a post-webinar email with all of the great books we shared, with Sydney's blogs from the summer, the different advice we got, so that all of our attendees can keep up. And for those asking, this was recorded and will be posted on Women in Sports Tech website either today or tomorrow. And then lastly, Sydney spoke about her experience as a WISC fellow. We encourage you to follow us on social media and to subscribe to our newsletter. The application will be opening in a few months, and we'll cover more of it there, but it's an amazing opportunity. If you have friends or classmates interested in the fellowship, it's open to students, grad students, and stay tuned to learn more. Lydia, do you have anything to add? Oh, I think a picture.
Yeah, I'll take a quick picture. Do that. Nice to have. But thanks everyone for joining. This was great. I want to go back to school now.
Yeah,
take your
thanks
courses.
for having us. It's been fantastic. And like Cheri mentioned earlier, we're happy to talk with anybody. So it's easy to find us online. You can also share our emails with the participants if you want.
Yeah, I'm the same. And I also think, as Nola knows, there's more and more of our colleagues getting into this research. There's more outlets. So we can help pull together some of those for you as well.
Great.
Mary Lou will help you too.
Yes.
Or you'll teach us, one or the other. Thanks, everybody.
Perfect.